Here's a question. You want to buy a hydropneumatic Citroen, something that wafts, but you're not really mechanically minded, or you are mechanically minded but you don't have a lot of money, or you've been bitten before by complicated cars. Is there a hydraulic Citroen out there that can tick all the boxes for you, give you the full range of Citroen-iness, while being simple to maintain, simple to repair, cheap to buy, cheap to run, and reliable? Yes. Is it a GS or GSA? No. Is it a Xantia? No. Is it a C6?
No, God! No, God, please, no! 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 No!
It is, of course, the BX, as it is the answer to most things, but specifically BX14. The BX14 came about when the BX was launched. It's not a model that appeared later on down the line, like a GTI or a GT or a turbo diesel or anything like that. When the BX came out, it was BX14 and BX16. 14 in BX14 refers to it being a 1.4. The engine is a 1.4 on the front of this car. It seems a small engine. When you consider the size of the car, a lot of people are put off because they think, well, that's a big car to be propelled by a 1.4 litre engine. But then you forget, you could get 1.3 litre Sierras, you could get 1.3 litre Cavaliers. I'm sure you could get a 1.3 litre Montego. I mean, they would have found a way of putting an A series into a Montego somehow, wouldn't they? In the case of the BX, it was actually a tactical ploy by Citroen, because the BX14 and BX16, of which I used to own, VEP, were priced differently. Citroen's marketing ploy with the BX14 was a little bit different to most manufacturers, because what it actually did is priced the 14 models to compete with smaller hatchbacks, cars like the Escort, the Astra from Vauxhall, or Cadet from Opel, cars like that, a Corolla sized car, you know. Whereas the BX16 was priced to compete more with cars like the Sierra and the Cavalier, or what's the Opel version of a Cavalier Mark II? A Skona? It wasn't the Vectra, was it? Yeah, that was basically the deal. The 1.4s would compete with the smaller cars, and the 1.6s would compete with the bigger cars. And it could do that because the interior of the BX had more room in it than a Sierra. It was a big enough car, but it was smaller, it was lighter, it was more frugal. In other countries, it was actually possible to get a BX11 if you really hated yourself. So with Citroen's masterstroke of having BX14 doing smaller cars and BX16 doing bigger cars, what's the advantage of a BX14? Why is this the one you should look for? Well, it only really applies to the later cars like this one. So if it's a car built after, I forget the exact date, I will put it on the screen now. If it's built after this date, it will have the TU series engine. That's important because the engine before that was the XY, otherwise known as the suitcase engine, and it was, I mean, it worked. Not the smoothest engine. So, because this is a budget BX, does that make it any less of a BX or any less of a true Citroen? No. No, it doesn't. Definitely not. I have a feeling the carb is not optimized. Right, let's go and see what this car's about. Now I have to admit, I am devilishly excited about driving this car. Why? Because my first car was the BX14RE. All the old cars are out today. There's a J-Reg Escort Cabriolet. Commiserations. My first car was a BX14RE, although not in Venetian red as this one is in. It was actually in, well, racing beige. otherwise known as blanc cremant, or basically white cream. Yeah, it was my first car, and I think that was more by accident, good fortune, because it was the only one I could afford to insure. It wasn't because I was being clever, but you could be clever. If you want to get a hydropneumatic Citroen, but you're scared, oh wow. The car spotting's insane today. That was a Perodua. What's the Perodua that was like a Daihatsu Move but uglier? It was one of them. So if you want to get a hydro Citroen, and the will is there, the passion is there, the excitement is there, the enthusiasm's there, but you are very nervous. You're a little bit, oh, I don't know what to do, I don't know which one to get, oh, they're all going to ruin me, blah, blah, blah. And you watch videos of idiots on YouTube fighting with them, not me. Is there a model you can get that will minimise this risk? And perhaps not even minimise the risk, pretty much remove the risk. Yes, there is. It's this, a BX14. Basically, if it's a 1988 car, the odds are going to be that it's got the TU engine in it, and you want the TU engine. There's nothing like wrong, especially with the one before it, the XY. It's a bit rattly. It's based on a Simca engine. It's a bit clunky, and yeah. The thing with those engines is there are jobs on those that are very, very easy, and there are jobs on those that are an absolute nightmare. And you kind of, you know, I think the gearbox is in the sump on those in a BX. It's hit or miss. Whereas with a TU, it's safe. The TU engine came out in, well, it was launched, really, developed up 1986, I would say, because the AX was the first car to get it. The AX being Citroen's new small car of the mid-80s, and a car that only exclusively used the TU engine. So the engine was developed for the smaller cars, meaning it takes up not a lot of room. Meaning, if you put it in the engine bay of a BX, you get loads of room around it, and that makes it easy to work on. If you are novice and you're enthusiastic, but you don't really know what you're doing, that is the engine bay you want to work on. The reason for this is that the BX as a model was developed with the XU engine. The XU engine is Citroen's version of, well, I don't know, Vauxhall's family engine. The XU is a simple all aluminium petrol engine. Came in 1.6 and 1.9, and then for diesel versions there was an iron block, and it came in 1.8 and 1.9. Eventually they came in 2 litre and everything like that, but that doesn't matter because the biggest engine in the BX was a 1.9. Now those engines, Citroen wanted to keep, because Citroen are Citroen, they wanted to have aerodynamics and packaging, so they had quite a small front area here, quite a small front end. And if you do that, it means you've either got to be very creative with the sump, or you've got to have a short stroke engine to make the engine short if you want to have decent capacity, a decent sort of really, fairly big engine in a small car. Now Citroen couldn't do that. If they had a small stroke engine, it would be revvy, and they want torque, they want cruising ability, because they weren't really into charging around, well, not until they made the 16 valve. So what they did is got the XU engine with a normal stroke and bore arrangement and laid it back slightly. This improved the weight. It meant that some of the engine was over the axle line. It brought the engine down at the top and up at the bottom because it turned it slightly, gave them a smaller front end, and managed to fit it into this engine bay. Now this is all very good, and this benefits the 14, because the 14 is a shorter engine because it has a shorter bore and stroke. It is smaller, and it can fit upright in this engine bay. It means you can do any job on this car pretty much from the top. I can see everything. I can see gear linkages, I can see a downpipe, I can see the security valve for the suspension, I can see the octopus, I can see the brake dozer valve. There's no BX job on this that's scary. But if you put the simple engine to one side, you still get all the Citroen goodness. You have a BX, it's the full package. It's the hydropneumatic suspension. It's the same suspension the most basic BX going got this suspension. It's not like you're missing out on anything with, over a GTI or something like that. You're not. You've got everything with this. You've got the power brakes. The only thing you don't have is power steering, or power assisted steering. You don't get that in a 14 at all. Not an option. Does it need it? Well, No, I don't think it does. If you're feeble-armed, it might, or if you're physically impaired somehow, you might struggle. You wouldn't be able to put a knob on it and, you know, do what the... I don't know what the right word is. Yeah, easy controls. Other than that, it's dead easy to drive. It's a 5-speed gearbox. There are a couple of options that will 4-speed. You're probably not going to find them in the UK because predominantly the two most common models you're going to find in the UK are the 14RE and the 14TGE. Both of those are top of the range 1.4s. That is as high as a 1.4 got in the UK. They have electric windows. This one has an electric sunroof. That would have been an option on this. Central locking. Quite sparse up here, so you don't get a rev counter, you get a clock. So you can rev your engine to, well, 10 AM, not RPM. But other than that, you know, you don't get the electric mirrors, you don't get the one-touch windows and things. If you were so bothered, you could retrofit those things from another BX. That wouldn't be a problem. But it's just such a delight. It's fun to drive. It's not, you know, if you were to get out of this and get in a 1.6, a BX16, you're not going to go, oh wow, that's a massive jump up. It's not. It's not. If you get very early BX16 like I had, like that, it doesn't even have power steering. Slightly heavier than this, not much, but it wasn't exactly heavy in that. There's a whole raft of reasons why the 14 really is. It's one of the best kept secrets for BXs, nay, hydropneumatic Citroens in general. This is one of the best kept secrets out there. I'm enjoying the smooth ride. I'm enjoying the quirks, all the quirks and features. I mean, you know, everything that you get in a BX, you get in this. It's not like you miss out on anything. It's just that it's much easier to work on if you have to. And not only much easier to work on, these aren't sought after. They're not popular. And because they're not popular, they're not expensive. You can buy these cheap. And then, because of the tax system in the UK, or the road fund license, or whatever it's called this week, this car, this BX, is the only type of BX that falls into the lower tax category. Now, I forget the exact numbers because I'm disorganised and I haven't researched a thing. This is all off the top of my head, but it falls into the lower tax category because it's below 1550cc, I think, is the cut-off. This is the 1360cc. And that means the tax on this is nearly half what it would be on a 1.6 BX. Makes it very cheap to run. If you drive it around lightly, you'll get 40 to the gallon without too much issue. I should think insurance will be pretty reasonable. The guy who owns this car, Pavel, who does not have a V in his name, he is 19, I think he said he was. Classic insurance. Cheap as chips. So you can get the earlier 14. The earlier 14 will still have the cheap tax. In fact, the oldest ones, one of the viewers of the channel, I believe Callum, Floyd the something, I can't remember the name of your channel, man, it's so long. He's got a BX 14RE, one of the oldest ones in the country. That will be tax exempt soon. So in terms of power output on these cars, you're looking at between 70 and 73 horsepower, which doesn't sound a hell of a lot, but the 1600 was, well, I'm pushing a Toyota Vitz Javella down the road, which looks very much like a Yaris to me with different badges on it. Yeah, most of the models have the 70 odd horsepower engine, same engine you got in a, well, technically same engine you get in an AX GT or a 205 XS, but slightly less tuned, slightly milder in terms of tuning. This engine was still being produced up until the noughties. The TU engine is solid, dependable, simple to work on, cheap to buy parts for, easy to get parts for. There's not really many bad sides to this car. The only one I can think of in the UK is that you can't get a fuel injected version. You could in Europe. In left-hand drive markets, you could get fuel injection, but we had to make do with a crappy carburetor. The TU is a dependable engine too. They can be taken to big mileages. I had an AX GT that had done 250,000 miles. And it ran fine. They're tough. I mean, look after most things and they last, but yeah, they're dependable engines. The models available, well, they varied. I mean, the 14RE came out at new, with the launch of the BX, and the 14E. The 14E is a basic version of the RE. The RE has a little bit more trim. It's basically a 1400 version of the 16RS. There was no TRE, 14 TRE or 14 TRS or anything, so you're not going to find one with electric rear windows, but again, you could retrofit it all if you so wished. That model carried on until it was replaced by the 14 TGE, and those are by far the most common type of 14 that you'll find. But there are others, there are other flavours. 14s, you've got special editions, there were quite a lot of those. What's the most common one you're going to find? Probably the Saint-Tropez. The Saint-Tropez was based on the E model, so it is wind-up windows, no central locking, even more basic than this one. But they are all in white. They're all badged Saint-Tropez because that was the name. In fact, were they the 14TE Saint-Tropez? I think they might have been the 14TE Saint-Tropez. They were all white. They had white sills, white door surrounds, white wheel trims. I mean, they were all white. There was also the Leader model. The Leader was not a BX specific trim, it was used in CXs as well, but it was again a basic version of the BX. They were silver. I think there were a couple of white ones, but they were mostly silver. Two-tone, basic interior again. No, wind-up windows. Didn't even have fabric on the door cards, if I remember rightly. I will put an info piece on the screen at the end of the video telling you the numbers of the special editions, which special editions there are, and how many there are believed to be in the UK, according to the government's data. But yeah, by far the most common type is going to be an RE or a TGE. That said, they're not as common as the diesels. They're not as common as diesels. They're not as common as 1.6s. They are thinner on the ground. But when they do come up, they're cheap because most people don't want a 14. I want power steering. Why? Do you need it? Look, one-handed. Ugh, so difficult. You don't need it. The only downside of not having power steering is you've got the gearing on the steering, which rhymes, it's longer, so it takes more arm twirling to achieve the same amount of turn, but it's not a sports car, is it, at the end of the day, so it doesn't really matter. But just because it's a basic car doesn't mean it's not fun. It is. It's still fun. It's got that typical Citroen quality that BXs do and other hydro Citroens. They do it so well, right up to the C6, where you can just maintain speed cross country. You don't have to slow down for things. It's not a car that you'd go racing around a circuit in, but A to B, you build the speed up. I mean, that's the limit. Done. That's 60. That's how long that took. And you just pitch it in. Enjoy the bends. It's just smooth. I suppose part of the thing you really want to look at, or part of the way you want to think about it, is what do you want to get from having a BX? Is it a BX you specifically want? And if it is, what do you want out of it? Because a lot of people, when they want to decide they're going to get a BX, they want a GTI or a turbo diesel. And you think, well, personally, I think, other than if there's a reason you specifically want that model, like nostalgia, or you used to have one or something like that, why? Because a turbo diesel is a pig to work on and quite noisy and smelly, and it's one of the heavier ones. The GTI, well, The GTO would make a better tourer than this, without a doubt, if you were just cruising along the motorway and you wanted to keep up speed. But who does long distance commuting or touring in BXs these days? They might do it, you know, once a year, part of an event, but you don't do it regularly. If you think about what you want to get out of the car, the 14 is kind of, it's one of the most sensible ones out there. In terms of a purchase, it really is the thinking man's BX or thinking lady's BX. But it's, you know, it's a fun car to drive, a little snickety gear change now that I've done the gear linkages on it. The same seats as a BX would normally have. There's nothing that you're missing out on by having the 14. There's nothing that you're selling yourself short on. The only thing I think, refinement is probably a little bit down on some of the others, simply because it doesn't have as much sound deadening. It's a slightly cheaper car, and you don't have the power steering. And you're a bit low on some of the equipment in here, but as I say, you could retrofit some of that. Otherwise, you're not really missing out on anything. So if you're thinking of buying a BX14, where should you look? Well, you need to look at all the things that normally cause you problems on BXs. That would be rust, up in there, along there, particularly under here, in there, up in there, back there, up here, in there, and along here. That should just about see you through. For most people, rust or bodywork are the two things that are the hardest things to sort out, because you can either spend thousands of pounds getting a car welded up that's completely rotten, or you can take a solid car that's quite tatty looking and spend thousands of pounds getting someone to paint it and make it look nice. So the thing to do really is to buy a BX14 that doesn't really need welding and has fairly nice bodywork, but mechanical problems, because mechanical problems are something you can probably do on the driveway. They are easy. Relatively speaking, they're easy. The car should be soft, like this. If it's not, you're not getting the full Citroen experience, and there's absolutely no point driving it. You might as well get an Audi A4. This car is still wearing its original wheel trims, which are held on by the wheel bolts. There's no retaining rim or anything that connects it to the wheel. Later cars do have that, but this one doesn't. None of the 14s will have the opera window. The trims don't allow it. Other than the body stuff, engine-wise, I mean, the gearbox they're known, they can be weak if they're driven hard. If they're driven lightly, they're fine, but, you know, or just normally, but if they're not treated with much mechanical sympathy, they're, yeah, they don't last that long. This car in particular there's little things that can affect the enjoyment. The clutch in this car is awful. It's relatively new, it's not heavy, but it's so sharp. It's one of the cheap ones. It hasn't got a proper like Valeo in it or LUK or something like that. It certainly don't feel like it. It feels like it's got one of those factor specials, like 20 quid or 30 quid or something. The cam belt's also a little bit tight, so it's whining a bit, but you know, I'll get to a hill like this, I'm having to stir the gears. Honda beat intensifies. But that means I'm having to drive it. I'm having to be involved. If I'm buying a car as a hobby, as a toy, as you know, something to enjoy, as a pastime, why get something that you don't have to work very hard? Get something that you're all in on. You're all fully involved, and it's fast enough. I'm doing the limit. I was going up quite a steep hill there, but I had to work. I'm involved. I do not understand. I've driven so many different types of BX, probably all of them. I have driven every type of BX. No, I haven't. So I haven't driven a 1.8 diesel or 17D as they're badged. I've not driven one of those. I don't think I need to really, but yeah, I've driven all of them. This is way more fun definitely more fun than a naturally aspirated diesel. More fun, probably as fun as a turbo diesel. Not as accomplished, I don't think it's any less fun. Well, no, I think it's more fun than a 1600. And it's cheaper to tax and easier to work on. It's win-win. So as long as your gearbox is okay, and the cam belt isn't too tight like it is on this. It's whining a little bit, which is just a little bit off-putting for the noise of the engine. Otherwise, you've got a nice crisp throttle response. It's a really nice thing to drive. You don't really need to look out for too much. Head gaskets can fail. It's not a known thing, but they can fail, and if it does, learn how to change it. Perfect car to learn on. Easy. Not bad. So it's one of the cheapest BXs you'll ever find. It's the cheapest one to run. It's the easiest one to work on. What are you waiting for? And there were some very, very basic versions of BXs around. They were all 14s. Well, they weren't. They weren't. They f***ing weren't. Now, I have to admit, I am devilish. Can't say devilish.